night. There's going to be some dual preaching going on here in the next few weeks. There's going to be, we're going to basically do a parallel series on Sunday morning's Bible study and as well as Sunday morning worship. So we might not necessarily be in the same passages, but we're going to be parallel. This series over the next 6 weeks is going to parallel each other, just to get some more in-depth, get some different perspectives, because there's times when in a preaching setting that we gain a little bit different perspective than a teaching setting. So we're going to do a 6-week parallel teaching and preaching, and there'll be some dual preaching in and out of there. Pastor David preaching, I might be preaching. It's going to be fun. And so make sure you dig in, commit to these next 6 weeks as we kind of dig in here and get going. It looks like many people are finishing up some last-minute summer vacations camping this weekend. I ended up in your, I got to tell you, most of you know I've been training for this long 17-mile run. 17.1. You can't do that 0.1 out. 17.1 miles up and over Imogene Pass. Now, I can tell you, I always call it Imogene. Does anybody know what Imogene or Imogene?
I don't know. I'm Imogene. It's okay.
The race director called it Imogene. I've always called it Imogene. But long story short, we finally got to run it yesterday. So my brother and I competed in this race, 17.1 miles. There were over right around 1,000 participants, 1,000 runners. It was insane. How many of you guys have been to your race? Yes, yes, beautiful. I mean, that's God's country up there. Come on. And so we were lined up. We got there a little bit early. And one time I turned around and like Main Street, we're at the end of Main Street towards Watts Canyon. And literally that whole street was just filled from side to side with participants ready to run. It was incredible. They had close to 1,300 people registered, but about 1,000 of them ran. And so 10 miles up, and you gain about 5,500 feet of elevation. It is unreal. I know, right? So my hamstrings are a little tight today. I won't be moving as much as normal. I know my folks they're still up in your race. My brother's still up in your race. I know some other people are out camping. And so it's a great time. It's a beautiful country. The leaves are already starting to turn. So if you want to get up and maybe take a drive next Saturday or something, it's worth getting up there because those leaves, I think, are going to start changing quick. But it was absolutely beautiful. And on the way down, I'm talking, it was straight down. It was straight up, but then it was straight down on the other side. And, so 10 miles up, 7 miles down. We finished 291 out of about 1,000 people. So that was a blast. I felt good about myself until about a half hour after I crossed the finish line, an 80-year-old couldn't cross the finish line. I thought, what? But, it kind of gives some perspective, but I love the grind and the challenge of running. I think there's so much that you can learn, whether it's for you or not. For me, it's something that I can, no doubt, I use it as a time to renew my mind. I pray a lot when I run. There was a lot of praying going up that hill. Usually I'm praying for other people. I was selfishly praying for this guy going up that hill. I gotta tell you, it was incredible. But it was fun. It was a blast. It was a great accomplishment. Probably the most painful 4.5. We finished in 4 hours and 20 minutes. That's a great man. I can't wait to do it again. All right. Hey, well, let's dig into this new series. This is Grandparents' Day. We're going to kind of start off with that. But let's pray together as we just kind of dive right in. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. And God, I'm just so grateful to be in your house and in your presence. Lord, I think for those that are watching online and streaming in, Lord, I pray that you bless them. I pray that you reach them just as much as if they were gathered right here. Lord, I thank you for those that are gathered here today. God, I just pray that you would open their hearts to what you have for them. Lord, I believe that this is, for such a time as this, such a significant series. As we think about the impact of our lives, the legacy that we're building, that we're living, and the impact that it will have for generations to come. God, teach us what that looks like. Lord, I just pray blessed to still have my 4 grandparents. They're all 80s, and even my grandpa's turning 90 here in September. Pretty amazing. But I think about this week, and even on my run, I was just thinking about the legacy as I was thinking about this series that we're kicking off. And I was thinking about the legacy of my grandparents, passed down to my parents, and then now to my family. Here I am raising a senior in high school this year, and I'm just like, what the heck, you know? And so it's amazing to see those generations and the impact that truly that we have the opportunity to live and leave for a lifetime and for generations to come. And so in this, as we begin in this legacy series, I absolutely love, we're going to be building off of this framework, or really a position in this understanding of a definition of legacy. And so let's first, in 2 Timothy 1:5, 2 Timothy, I love Timothy. I talk about him often. Paul wrote a letter to Timothy. He's one of the youngest pastors to pastor a mega church back in Ephesus. When the churches were just the birth of the new churches. And so Timothy, learning and hoping to succeed, and yet he had all odds against him. And yet Paul, and I love that generation, Paul was investing into Timothy, but Timothy had already had some influence in his life. And Timothy became one of the greatest pastors on the forefront of the church as we know it. And it was a result of the legacy that his, not only mom, but also his grandmother, and Paul attributes that, and I just wanted to start with that today as we kick into this new series, Legacy. In 2 Timothy 1:5, Paul's writing this letter to Timothy, he's encouraging him, and in verse 5, he says, I have been reminded of your sincere faith. So Paul he's commending Timothy's faith. He's commending Timothy's willingness and surrender to say yes to God. And he says, which first lived in your grandmother Lois. I love that. And in your mother Eunice. And I am persuaded now lives in you also. Man, look at that. Generation to generation to generation. Listen, your life, your impact, and your legacy is significant. I would imagine that Timothy's grandmother wasn't thinking when little Timothy was much, much younger. I highly doubt, because the church wasn't really even around at that time, I highly doubt that Timothy's grandma was investing into his faith at one time. He would leave one of the most mega churches in Ephesus, 20,000 plus, right out of not even going to Bible college, right? I guarantee that wasn't on her radar. She just had this faith in God. She imparted it to her daughter, which in turn, I'm sure, Timothy gained from his mom, but he also gained from his grandma. And so on this Grandparents' Day, just know this, as many of you gathered here, some of you tuning in today, that you're significant. And your impact and the legacy that you live, specifically on this Grandparents' Day, know that it matters. And you might not see that harvest today or 7 years. It might be 14 years. Regardless, it might be a generation that perhaps you might not ever see. But look at the significance that it played in Timothy's life. It's amazing. And so I just want to give God praise for all our grandparents today. So if you are in here today, know that you're loved, you're blessed. Thank you for being a grandparent. It's probably sometimes easier job to be a parent. You just get to sit back. Sometimes they come back to you. You're like, all right, I got it now. And so there's many different journeys, I understand. But the facts are, I'm thankful for grandparents today. Aren't you as well? Amen? And I'm sure we can all think about the legacy, the impact impact that you're having on, she teaches our second graders over at ECA, and she's taught our pre-K to kindergarten, now second graders, maybe first graders last year, and now the impact that you might have. Now let's think about that impact, that legacy. How many of you have teachers that has impacted your life, right? In that journey. It might be Sunday school teacher, might be in school teacher, might be just someone in your life. It might have been a relative. You don't have to be a grandparent to have impact on someone's life. It might have been a friend. But regardless of age and where you're at in life, you're establishing and building your legacy. So now let's establish what this legacy is. This is what we're going to be building upon over the next 6 weeks. I love, how would you define, don't look at your paper, you probably already did. The answer's not in there, but in your own brain, when you saw the word legacy, how would you define it? What would be your definition of legacy?
Your kids' kids.
Okay, your kids' kids. So you're talking generations. That's good. So family generation. That's good. That's part of a legacy. What else?
Influence that you leave behind.
Sorry, go church. Traditions. Yeah, think about that. Think about the legacy of tradition that family has had. At times, even church, tradition in church, as that's been an impact. So legacy not only as a person, but also as an institution. We'll talk about that in a minute. What'd you say?
The influence that you leave behind on people that
Yeah,
you
absolutely. The influence, how you make decisions, how you went about life, right? Sometimes legacy is not so good, right? You got to think about what that legacy looks like. It might have negative impact. So I want to leave a positive impact, amen, right? I want that legacy. I think it's important to think about that because regardless of where you're at in life today, you have establishing, and will carry out some legacy of your life. We all have influence on somebody. I promise you that. I promise you that. Now, I can't wait 10, 15, 20 years from now when some of those kids start full circle. It's amazing. I finally have come to a point in my life where I'm marrying off or dedicating children of kids that were in my youth program 20 years ago when I was a youth pastor. That is crazy to me. But it's amazing to see that influence. And so again, that's part of a legacy. That's part of an impact. What was another definition? Any other definition of legacy? Come to mind. Anybody?
I know a person's job.
What's that?
Following up the person's job. I can take.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It could be a trait that we pass on. Could even just be even in a business, following someone's legacy of business and job and filling that role. Online, make sure you comment in that comment section. Let us know what you might think that comes to mind for leaving a legacy or just the definition of legacy. But there's this definition of legacy that we're going to build off of. And man, it really spoke to me, and that's why I chose this tree to kind of be the image of this. But this definition of legacy, there's many different definitions. But in this definition, it says a lengthened shadow of one person or an institution. Man, let that settle for a second. Man, that was good. We're going to revisit that here in Big Church here in a little bit. But a lengthened shadow of one person or an institution. That's huge. And so you can imagine as I'm running this mountain yesterday and just thinking about, and this was the 48th annual run. They've done this 48 years. That's crazy. So there's a tradition passed on, right? There's a legacy that goes on. There's guys that have run that many times. I'm on my first time, I'm like, oh, good Lord, that was brutal. Let's do it again. Now I know why, right? There's this, I'm doing that. But I saw the shadows of a tree. How amazing is the shadow of a tree, right? You have this, and especially we're hunting shade, right? We're on the backside going down to the Telluride. It was so hot, right? And I'm trying to find shade, and I'm running up in this area. I can't really veer off, but a tree gives off that shadow from a tree, short of living in Arizona. I understand there's Arizona folks with us today. You can't, especially in the extreme heat, you can't escape it. Shade does nothing, right? It just makes you feel darker or something. You can't escape the heat in Arizona, but in God's that your life leaves. So, how many are breathing today? Right? We're living, right? So we are a living legacy, but here's the facts. At some point, you will leave a legacy. And this lengthened shadow of one person or an institution is when you think about it as a tree, the legacy you're living now, it's actively providing and growing. That's the beauty of it. Have you ever watched a tree grow, right? Especially over at my grandparents' house. I know a tree, and I've seen this tree grow over years and years and years. And it once put off a little bit of shade, now it puts off a lot. And the shadow of this tree just continues to expand. And so within that, I think about my life. And as we're living a legacy, we have to continue to remember, okay, what's it going to look like as I leave my legacy? Because there's no doubt there's times that we get to prepare for that, but there's also times that we don't. And so, let's invest now with our gifts, talents, abilities, everything that God's entrusted to us, that when that time does come, that the legacy of the life of faith we live, the legacy of life that we use our gifts, talents, abilities, resources for, God's kingdom, that it establishes an amazing legacy that will carry out for generations. Any thoughts on that? Everybody get a grasp on where we're going? I mean, this is significant. And so within this, legacy distinctly connects to stewardship. And so we are going to spend some time over the next 6 weeks talking about stewardship. The definition, that's the second fill in the blank, stewardship, is a responsible overseeing and protection of something considered worth caring for or preserving. It doesn't just talk about money. Stewardship is not just about our finances. We're going to talk about the stewardship of our life. Our legacy is going to be connected to how we treat each other. What is our legacy? So speaking of that, what is our shadow built off of in terms of leaving a legacy? What impact do you leave on? What's that?
Character.
Character, absolutely. Your character is a significant piece to that legacy, to establishing that shadow. What else? What else comes to mind?
If, I remember my grandpa Ransom, he had a farm. I go over there as a kid, pick vegetables.
Yeah.
That was a legacy.
Absolutely. So even stewardship as in terms of teaching you how to take care of what he was managing, right? As a farm, whatever that might be. It could be from character. It could be from work ethic, right? I think, something I live by, and especially Elijah, the older he gets, I'm trying as much, I talk about often is something worth doing, do it right. I've taught that, I've preached that, I try to live by that, I fail at that miserably sometimes. But doing it right doesn't necessarily mean having perfection all the time. It just means giving your best. It means, man, if it's something worth doing, give your whole heart to it. Even if you fail, go at it with everything you have. I hope that sticks not only in my kids' life, but those around me. That's something I live by. So I think that's part of stewardship. I think that's part of, remember, the responsible overseeing and protection of something considered worth caring for and preserving. I think about the church. Do you realize that the influence and impact that we're investing into this church, into our kids, into our students and teens, and all the above, what today is going to impact what this church looks like 10, 15, 20 years from now. It stirs in my heart on a daily basis, Lord, what will the church be like 10 years from now? It keeps me up at night sometimes. And I understand that the stewardship, the responsible overseeing of what God has entrusted us to, I think about church. I think about what are my kids and my kids' kids going to have as a church? What is that going to look like? What are we establishing? I think about, let's reflect for a moment. I think about the impact. Let's go back when we were still at Sullivan, had no vision for school or anything like that. And now you fast forward 20 years, we have 2 campuses, we have thriving school, daycare, we have church with multiple ministries and serving around the globe. And that wasn't necessarily on the radar, but it was the stewardship, it was the investment, it was the legacy of those 20 years ago that took part of investing, and now we see the fruit of it. That's huge. That's part of legacy. 2 principles we're going to unpack to help us better understand biblical stewardship. God owns everything. God owns what?
Everything.
Come on, everyone's got to say it. God owns everything. Everything. He has talents, abilities, resources. He owns it all. He's the creator of all things. And He allows us to manage His wealth and blessings. Once again, this goes beyond finances. This goes beyond this stewardship is about time. Man, guess what? Time's probably the most valuable thing on earth. Can't buy more of it. We've talked about that in recent teachings. Investing our time wisely. Number 2, you can trust God to provide. I believe that in leadership. I believe that in all of the above. We're going to be receiving and installing a new youth pastor today. Praise the Lord. We've got some Arizona folks with us today. There was a need for a youth pastor. We've prayed this summer. This strategy of it was really cool. This last Wednesday, I really invited, Pastor Billy and I have been overseeing the youth during the summer, helping keep things going. And I really invited our teens to be a part of praying for our youth pastor. And we actually, the very first Wednesday that I was up there, I just said, hey, let's go to the drawing board. And we wrote out characteristics of what you were looking for in a youth pastor. And so every Wednesday, a team would pray for whatever youth pastor was. This was weeks and weeks and weeks of this. And so it was funny when we announced to the teens that we're going to be hiring Josh. Josh had come out, we'll meet him here this morning. If you haven't met him yet, he came out, and so I put him up there and I said, hey, remember when we prayed about this for weeks and weeks and weeks? Let's revisit your list. And he got all but one thing. It was lovely locks. I don't know if someone I'm not going to shake that. No. He said, I got a good beer. But okay, good. But that was just kind of funny. But everything that the kids were looking for and praying about in a youth pastor, just brings those dynamics. It was just amazing to see those things line up. And we celebrated exciting. We're installing him as our full-time youth pastor this morning. We give God praise. So again, whether it be your finances or your needs, or remember, legacy is a lengthened shadow of a person or an institution. And so when we understand that this belongs to God, even though many of you have been a part of this for many, many years, this still belongs to God. Pastor Dave is our lead pastor. This church is still God's church. And at some point, his legacy will live on or lead on. He's living that legacy now for Pastor Dave. What he's established over these last 20 years is amazing. At some point, he'll lead that legacy. What does that look like? And so within that, we've got to think about the impact and the reality. God owns everything, and you can trust God to provide. So the lengthened shadow of this institution as the church, God knew that we needed a youth pastor for this next season. I believe it's going to be a very rich season of ministry coming out of COVID, still navigating through that, but I believe the church is positioned to reach people in all ages, in all generations, I think more than ever. I truly believe that. And I believe that, once again, we had a need, and God has now provided that need. We can always trust God to provide. Let's dig in here. Lady Elgin, it's a story of a massive in gratitude towards salvation or loving God, offer free of charge via painful sacrifice seems to be of the worst kind. We are prone to make our needs known. We cry out to God for help, for rescue from the miry pit. But how often do we voice our gratitude? We are so quick, and it's not pointing fingers. It's part of our nature that we are good about sharing ingratitude or what we need, what we want. But how often do we show gratitude? I think in all biblical principles, short of salvation, I believe all biblical principles first start with God and then are lived out with others. Well, I guess salvation would be too, but the facts are, I believe that gratitude starts with understanding that God owns it all, right? Amen. That He should be the one that we praise. But I also think we need to share that with others, right? It needs to be something that's collective, that we're praising God, but also showing gratitude towards others. How good is it to know when someone says, "Hey, Trish, I appreciate you"? Simple words. And I'm thankful for you. I'm checking. If you don't hear anything today, what have you got anyway this week? And just be a blessing. Just people that are around you that you're thankful for, call them, tell them, "I'm thankful for you." Maybe you haven't seen someone or talked to somebody 10 years that their legacy impacted your life. When was the last time you called them and said, "Man, I'm just thankful for you"? Right? That's part of this. Part of this lengthened shadow that has impacted us, and now we get to live on and help it to impact others. And at some point, you become that impact that you are thankful for. That's significant. Let me ask you this. What is the relationship between gratitude and generosity? So again, let's think about time, talent, resources. Let's talk about all of the above. What is the relationship between thankfulness, gratitude, and generosity? Living faithful with your lives. What does that look like? What's the relationship? Is there a relationship? Donnie, shaking your head. Give it to us.
Well, for me, as I feel so thankful for what God has done for me,
Amen.
there's so much done that I am automatically serving enough in other ways, and I'm not thinking about it as that.
No, that's good. No, absolutely. So Donna, I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, but you come to a place in your life where you acknowledge that God's faithfulness. You said how good God has been to you. In turn, it drives you or compels you to be a blessing to others. Is that
Right.
or to give back?
Yes, but without having to say, "Oh, I've got to."
Yes, absolutely. So it's become a part of who you are now, right? Donna?
Yes.
Yes, that's legacy. That's a lengthened shadow. God's blessing on your life now has become a part of you. And I'll just kind of jump right to it. There's a significant connection between gratitude and generosity. How many of you know individuals that? So let's talk about time. Let's talk about gifts, talents, abilities. Let's talk about resources. You talk about those three things. I know people in all of those areas that are very stingy with their time, very stingy with their resources, very self-absorbed in their gifts, talents, abilities. Right? They live for me, myself, and I. Are they typically someone that's generous? No, right? I know people that live very. So let's put that on the other side. I would say the impact of that was somewhere they live very ungrateful, right? How many of you know someone that's very ungrateful? You can raise your neighbor's hand. It's okay, right? Okay? A little comment down there below the comments. But the facts are we know people that are ungrateful. And typically people that are driven by being ungrateful, they're not typically the most generous people. There's a direct reporting in God's Word. Yes, sir. Come on, absolutely. Yeah, but I heard that. That's it. We're going to actually cover that in this series. That's good. So my brother here talked about how there's times that we're praying about me saying, okay, God, if you do this, then I'll do this, right? If you bless me with this, I will tell everybody about it, right? That's not showing true gratitude. That has strings attached. True gratitude and true biblical generosity has no strings attached. And I think this connects here, as well as what Donna said earlier, is it just compels her. That's just the life that she lives now. Your asking of God isn't, okay, God, you need to do this, or we often do that. We'll talk about this even. We often say, and you've heard me say this before, but I think we fall in this trap often. If we desire to pursue God's will, and we desire, how many of you want what the best God has for us? Yes? Come on. How many of you want the best for your family? Yes. Of what God has for us? Yes. But often we say, okay, God, this is what's best. Come bless this, right? Man, and that's such a quick trap for all of us. And so I love your honesty in that you've got to be careful to not fall into that. That's huge. Thank you for sharing. Do you think most people do a good job managing their time, talents, and treasures? In general.
You go through phases.
Yeah, that's good. Trish says she thinks we go through phases. I mean, you know, a time that you're, a season of life that you are more invested with your time, right? Okay. Sometimes we go through seasons that we're more invested with our talents, our gifts, abilities, the characteristics, the things that how we live our life that bless others, and also in our treasures, in our tithe, in our resources, in just being a blessing to others. There's times that I have a more giving heart than others. What causes those different seasons? What do you think?
Sometimes just life circumstances.
Yes, absolutely. Life circumstances, no doubt. Yep. What else? Think about legacy. Think about a lengthened shadow. A tree this big only gives off so much shadow, yeah? Okay, but a tree this big gives off more shadow, right? Sometimes it's experience. Sometimes it's life experiences of going through that. I know that I was once less generous because I didn't understand how God worked in His economy, the way He blesses, and then there's times that are very tough, and then we think, okay, God, I remember you provided in this. Are you going to provide here, right? And there's still this battle of flesh. What else? What causes different seasons in connected with generosity and gratitude?
Maybe if you've been hurt.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Hurt, seasons. Yeah, think about that. Times that we've been hurt, we pull back in our nature, no doubt. And that can be let's talk about legacy for a second. That can be individual. That could be in our family, right? As families connected, working together, and maybe there's hurt there, and it's not quite given as we were. Maybe let's look at it as an institution, as the church. Let's talk about that for a moment. There's times that people have been hurt in the church, no doubt. And through that once this faithful giver and whatever that looks like goes through a season of pulling back. So I would consider whatever that looks like for you, let's examine where you are today. For time's sake, we're going to cover these next 2 points, and then we'll pick up with this next week. We'll finish this backside of this. But let's just take a moment and to make a short list of our blessings that God has given us. And so maybe this will help us. What season are you in right now? Do you feel that you are being faithful with what God has entrusted you with? That's stewardship. When I think of the definition of stewardship, the responsible overseeing protection of something considered worth caring for and preserving, what does that look like for you? Your faith, your family, the church, where you work? What does that look like for you? Sometimes we lose sight of what matters most. We begin to focus on things that really doesn't mean they're bad, but we just put our focus into areas that we just lose focus. That would be my answer to what Trish said earlier. I think part of it, different seasons we go to, we lose track, we lose sight. Especially now in 2021, more than ever. There's so much divide, there's so much, man, given you that are worth caring for and preserving? Make a short list. Take just a second. Would anyone be willing to share any of your answers? You can keep yourself alone. We're going to revisit this next week. Very important. Anybody want to share? What are you thankful for? Short list of blessings. What's one of your answers?
This church.
This church.
This
Come
was
on.
a big blessing for me.
Amen.
People here are my church family.
Come on.
And
Amen.
right now, the only family I have.
Wow. Amen. Amen. It's awesome.
A legacy my dad taught me how to be by myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Life you dealt with and imparted to you life lessons. It's huge. What else? If you're online, type in the comments. I'd love to see them. We're going to revisit this next week. Short list of blessings that God has. And I read this word that God has given you. I wish I would. Maybe I'll retype it for next week, but I would say entrusted to you. Because I think there's something that's real different. When you think of something that's just given to you, right? It's like, okay, cool. It really doesn't matter what I do with that. What am I talking? But as I was even just thinking through this first part of this teaching, entrusted when Almighty God, there's a big difference. God's given you something. Well, God has entrusted you with something. And there's no strings attached. He's not saying, okay, I'm giving you this, and, but there is, according to God's word, there's blessings through being faithful with what God has entrusted. So we're going to pick up right here next week and dig into the backside of this teaching to help us understand, really establishing today. I think it's so perfect on this Grandparents' Day, just thinking about the impact of generation to generation to generation. And we're going to continue this series next week, and this teaching right here, picking up from these blessings. And what does your legacy look like? You're living that legacy now, but someday it will be a legacy that you leave. What does that look like today that it's going to look like tomorrow? Let's go. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this morning. God, I thank you for those that are gathered. I thank you for those that are tuning in and even watching it later this week. God, I just pray that you speak to our hearts right where we are. That, God, that you would capture our minds and our hearts, and that you would help us to get a hold of this biblical principle of stewardship. This stewardship that is connected so deeply to legacy, to this lengthened shadow that our life casts. And Lord, I pray that we would look at our faith, we would look at our resources, we would examine the words we say, the actions we live. And we would take an honest look to say, God, am I being faithful with all that you've entrusted me to? Lord, I believe that over these next 6-7 weeks or so, God, there's going to be some adjustments we need to make. God, begin to stir in us now. Lord, I pray that we wouldn't pull back from this. Lord, because I believe and I've seen you work so many times and you never fail. God, I trust that you own all things and you are worthy to be trusted to provide at all times. Lord, I pray that you would renew that sense of faith in your church today, in your people today, and maybe even just that person that's listening even now that finds it difficult to trust. Renew that trust in you today. Lord, bless this series as we move forward. Bless the rest of this morning. We pray in the name of Jesus. And everybody said, and then thanks for being here today. And be committed. Invite somebody to join you next week right here. Tune in online.